So, you know that feeling when you really want to grasp something complex, have those like light bulb moments, but without getting totally bogged down in endless details?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's exactly what we're aiming for today. We're taking a pretty fascinating journey into mystical ascesis by Pietro Ubaldi.
Ah, yes. This book is quite the deep exploration, isn't it?
Yeah.
It looks at how our psychic abilities can evolve, moving from simple intuitive flashes, maybe,
Mm.
all the way to a profound sense of oneness with something divine.
Right.
And what makes it really interesting is that Ubaldi bases all of this, or claims to, on his own personal experiences.
Exactly. So our mission today really is to extract the key insights from Ubaldi's personal journey, his intellectual journey too. We want to understand his perspective on this whole mystical ascent,
Mhm.
what he believed about the nature of our consciousness, and that really powerful connection he felt with Christ. Honestly, prepare for some potentially, well, paradigm shifting
Oh,
ideas.
absolutely. Even a quick glance at the index gives you a sense of the scope. It's huge.
Yeah.
You've got the development of mediumship, the interplay between faith and reason, even like a map of spiritual growth, different layers of consciousness explored.
It's a lot.
It is. It's a very ambitious work. And Ubaldi starts off by looking at inspirative mediumship, those moments of clear conscious insight.
Okay.
He sees this as definitely more advanced than just passively receiving messages, but importantly, not the ultimate stage. He actually anticipates a further evolution leading to something he calls normal dematerialization.
Normal dematerialization. That sounds out
It
there.
does sound out there. A state that might seem completely beyond scientific understanding, yet he insists it's rooted in his own lived reality.
Okay. Let's unpack this term then, mystical ascesis. What exactly did Ubaldi mean by it?
Well, for Ubaldi, mystical ascesis is basically the whole process, the entire journey of spiritual development we're discussing.
Okay.
It's the journey of our psychic abilities, moving from those clear moments of conscious inspiration, what he specifically terms lucid metaphenia,
Lucid metaphenia, got it.
right, all the way up to full-blown mysticism. And in this final stage, the individual, the receiver, becomes completely, well, unified with the source, the transmitter. His entire study, really, and his own path unfold within these boundaries.
So it's all about this upward climb of the spirit then. What did he think was the fundamental driving force behind it all?
Exactly. He calls it the universal and insuppressible evolution of the spirit. That's the core driver.
Insuppressible.
Yeah. He contrasts simple mediumship with what he calls the overwhelming intensity of the mystical state, this sort of vertigo of light.
Wow.
Now, in this mystical state, it's not like the personality just dissolves into unconsciousness. That's not it. Instead, it's consciously lifted to what he calls the superconceivable.
The super conceivable. That sounds incredibly powerful. Did he have any specific experiences that really illustrated this for him?
He did. He describes a really profound inner experience, hearing a voice. And this voice expressed the spiritual essence of all existence as a tourbillon of spheres. A tourbillon of spheres. Imagine like a swirling vortex representing everything music, harmonious light, a gigantic structure, even a song made of concepts and feelings.
Okay, I'm trying to picture that.
It's intense.
Yeah.
And this voice invited him to release his focus on, temporal pain, earthly stuff, and allow his spirit to just explode into the immeasurable, the infinite, the divine rhythm of it all. And he emphasizes this really crucial insight. Every soul is made to see and hear.
Every soul.
Every soul. So the key takeaway here is Ubaldi's understanding of spiritual reality, not as static, but as this dynamic, interconnected movement embracing everything.
Wow. Okay. That's a really vivid image. Now, he also talks about different ways of trying to understand these experiences, right? He's critical of something he calls the objective method.
Yes, absolutely. This is a really central point for Ubaldi. He argues that the objective method, this standard scientific idea of separating I from not I, subject from object.
Right. Consciousness from the external world.
Precisely. That whole framework, which really underpins a lot of modern psychology, he believed is fundamentally inadequate when we're trying to grasp these deeper spiritual realities.
Why inadequate?
He believed this division, which he saw as rooted in our egoism, actually prevents any real conceptual penetration. It blocks real understanding.
So that detached rational approach is actually a barrier.
According to Ubaldi, yes, it creates a barrier to understanding these deeper truths.
Okay, so if the objective method doesn't work for this stuff, what alternative does he suggest? What should we use instead?
He champions what he calls the intuitive method.
The intuitive method.
Yeah, here, consciousness needs to become humble, receptive, able to internally transport itself, you could say, to the core essence of phenomena.
Mm.
He argues that by remaining separate, autonomous, trying to control things with just our will and intellect, the objective method actually suppresses our sensitivity. It suppresses the voice of phenomena, leading only to superficial appearances, illusions, really.
So you miss the deeper reality.
Exactly. He even suggests that the very thought of God within things withdraws when faced with doubt or intellectual force, but reveals itself to those who approach with love and faith.
Is it like tuning a radio? You need the right frequency, the right openness to pick up the signal clearly.
That's a great analogy, actually. It really captures it. It's about being open to the experience, attuning to it, rather than trying to dissect it from a distance.
Okay. And how does this intuitive approach then lead to the unification he talks about, this mystical catharsis?
Well, in mystical catharsis, consciousness moves beyond just, say, radiophonic communication, receiving messages from this neuric source.
Which is how he described inspirative mediumship.
Right. Instead, it starts to overlap and identify directly with that source.
Yeah.
The separation dissolves.
Ah.
And this intimate, integral contact spontaneously grants knowledge through what he calls a new sense of vision. Truth transcends rational categories. Our usual logical schemes just become insufficient.
We can't contain it.
They simply can't contain these new understandings. So yeah, it's about shifting from that external controlling perspective to a more internal receptive one. And it's through this receptive internal approach that Ubaldi believed you could move beyond just receiving information to actually merging with the source. That's mystical catharsis.
So it's like a direct knowing. It goes beyond logic.
Precisely. Consciousness expands dramatically and human thought undergoes this, well, profound revolution. This renovation that Ubaldi insists is really impossible to truly grasp unless you've experienced it yourself.
Right.
Understanding, in his view, is directly tied to the amplitude, the depth of your consciousness, and how sensitized it has become.
And as we progress through these stages, I imagine our own understanding of things naturally changes too, because our own I, ourself, is constantly evolving.
Exactly right. As we ascend, the personal I, which he describes interestingly as the multiple individual expressions reflecting the single unity of the absolute, start to awaken, to move. He reminds us that while the absolute itself, the ultimate reality, remains simple, monistic, unified, it expresses itself in the infinite variety of the relative world. So our individual perspectives, our eyes, are constantly in flux as we evolve.
This idea of the absolute and the relative, it sounds like there could be some viewpoints that seem contradictory as we try to grasp this underlying unity.
Oh, absolutely. Ubaldi acknowledges this apparent divergence. He says we need to actively work to overcome these seeming contradictions, to reconstruct the underlying unity of substance.
How do we do that?
We shouldn't be intimidated by these seemingly conflicting interpretations. Instead, he says we need to coordinate the expressions of the relative to rebuild that unitary fabric of the absolute. The division, he stresses, in how humans manifest and perceive things, not in the fundamental substance itself.
So it's about piecing together different perspectives, almost like different facets of the same truth, to get a fuller picture. Like the blind man and the elephant, maybe.
Exactly like that. He uses the analogy of subjective intuitions aligning based on their amplitude and depth. Relative truth, he says, will coordinate from the lesser to the greater, gradually approaching the substance, making it more and more transparent. He sees these intuitions as jets of light, representing an eternal infinite language, a kind of divine sermon almost.
Wow.
And the measure of truth, importantly, isn't going to be simple objectivity or just counting how many people agree on something.
Right.
Rather, it's the degree of purification of the individual being as they evolve and get closer to God.
Yeah.
That shifts the focus quite a bit, doesn't it?
It really does, from external validation to internal transformation. Now, Ubaldi places a lot of importance on mysticism itself, doesn't he, as a key indicator of this spiritual evolution?
Yes, absolutely central. He considers mysticism in its various forms to be the most ostensive indices, the most obvious signs and exponents of spiritual evolution. It's central to his entire study, just as it was central to his life.
So it's not just a side effect, it's core to the process.
It is the process, in many ways. He emphasizes understanding this mystical phenomenon within the broader context of universal phenomenology, seeing it as a natural continuation of psychological and biological evolution, moving from the organic phases to higher spiritual ones.
So not something weird or supernatural, but natural.
Exactly. He stresses it's universal, logical, natural, necessary, and, as he said before, insuppressible. It only seems super normal relative to where human consciousness currently sits on the evolutionary ladder.
And this isn't something that just happens randomly, right? He sees it as part of a larger inherent order.
Precisely. He points out that mystical experiences appear across all times, all places, may be shaped by individual intellectual types, but the core phenomenon persists. It's an integral moment of life's inherent laws. He sees it emerging at a point of, well, highest human maturation, not as some arbitrary miracle or a gift randomly bestowed from above, but as a natural manifestation of divine order, justice, and harmony.
Okay. He also brings in this idea of knowledge being deeply connected to our internal state, our vibratory state. Is that the term he uses?
Yes, that's a key concept for him. He defines knowledge itself as a vibratory state of attunement. And crucially, it's achieved through goodness and spiritual ascension.
So our inner state determines what we can know.
In essence, yes. If instead of following those paths, cultivating trust, creating resonance, if you fall into a negative vibratory state, one of doubt, distrust, creating dissonance,
You close yourself out.
you automatically close yourself off to knowledge. It's about aligning ourselves internally, harmonizing to receive this deeper knowledge.
So it's about harmonizing our inner vibrations to be receptive to truth, like tuning that radio again.
Precisely. That analogy holds. He consistently uses concepts like vibration, resonance, attunement, affinity, unification. These are the pathways, he argues, for the spirit to peacefully merge with truth. He argues that the fundamental problem of knowledge isn't just intellectual. It's essentially a problem of unification between the human eye and divinity. It's a problem of mystical ascesis, of revelation. The divinity within our consciousness, he says, is only limited by our capacity to conceive of it. It's given to our soul according to its power of harmonization.
And what happens when we actually reach that state, that deep attunement, completed unification?
Ubaldi describes it quite beautifully. Truth then becomes a divine canticle, a supreme harmony, a fire of love where the soul no longer feels distinct, separate from the source. It's total immersion.
Wow. Now, he mentions that his previous work, like The Great Synthesis, essentially stopped at a certain point, didn't it? At the peak of the spirit and consciousness dimension. But this book, Mystical Ascesis, ventures even further.
That's absolutely right. He explicitly says his earlier work primarily explored that spirit and consciousness dimension. But Mystical Ascesis, this work, ventures beyond that. It goes into what he describes as the first zones of a superior three-phase universe, using coordinates like +x, +y, +z.
Yeah, the three-phase universe.
Yeah, it sounds complex. He even calls this study an incursion into the inconceivable. He's essentially descending, he says, from the superconceptual ecstasy of pure vision back down to our current rational dimension to try and analytically expose the underlying laws and the content of this whole phenomenon.
So he's really trying to bridge that enormous gap between profound mystical experience and our everyday rational understanding.
Exactly. That's the challenge he sets himself. He talks about the intuitive synthetic plane of consciousness as already being, frankly, super normal for the average person. In this zone, he says the genesis of an independent spiritual psyche is complete. It allows perception of higher consciousness zones through resonance. This is the phase he calls conscious and inspirative metaphenia, but of knowledge and synthesis, not ignorance and analysis.
And how is it reached?
Through intuition, introspection, and that key concept again, vibratory attunement with zones where truth is, in a sense, already registered.
Like tuning into a broadcast that's already there. And this lucid metaphenia you mentioned earlier, is that part of this?
Yes. Think of lucid metaphenia as those moments of sudden, clear insight within this intuitive synthetic plane, a flash of understanding that feels like it comes from beyond your normal thought process.
And he personally experienced this zone. That's what led to The Great Synthesis.
Yes, he's very clear about that. He states that the Great Synthesis was the direct result of his own verification of this ultrasensory reality, this phenomenal truth, achieved through his personal attunement and inner vision within this intuitive synthetic zone.
Okay. Now, he also touches on how this spiritual phenomenon isn't just individual, right? It extends into the collective.
Yes, that's another important expansion in this work. He explains that the spiritual phenomenon, which he analyzed so thoroughly at the individual level, also manifests in collective resonances. These multiply and transform it.
Collective resonances.
Yeah. This reveals the genesis, he says, of superpositions and fusions of consciousness, ultimately leading to entirely new forms of collective existence.
Wow. Like a group mind.
Kind of. He even sees early signs of this on our own plane, in the phenomenon of collective consciousness, where individual consciousnesses expand and interpenetrate through a less egoistic understanding of the common good. He uses the term nours for this.
Yeah.
Noures. Think of them as interconnected currents of shared understanding, sympathy, love, attraction. Almost like a spiritual internet linking spirits together.
So this expansion of consciousness that comes from spiritual ascesis isn't just about personal enlightenment, then. It has much broader implications for how we exist together.
Absolutely. It's not just acquiring more knowledge. It's an increasingly integral expansion of the entire being in all its qualities. Awakened and potentiated successfully from what he calls the germ.
The germ.
Yeah, the universal form of phenomenal expansion or divine manifestation. He emphasizes that the being undergoes fundamental changes not just in consciousness, but in conceptual dimension, ways of perceiving, feeling, even its very nature. The fundamental laws governing life themselves shift across these different planes.
So evolution continues, but in a very different way.
Precisely. This continuous process of overcoming and evolving transforms and purifies us, leaving behind the scoria, the dross, the residue of lower states.
He uses a really interesting image to illustrate this progressive coming together, doesn't he? Something about two overlapping circles.
Yes, that's a very helpful visual he provides. He uses the image of two overlapping circles across different planes to represent the increasing coincidence of consciousnesses as one ascends.
How does that work?
He shows how the area of non-coincidence progressively decreases. First it's half non-coincident, then a quarter, then an eighth as they move through higher planes. It vividly illustrates this gradual process of merging and unification.
That makes sense. And in these higher planes, the very nature of consciousness itself transforms. It becomes more collective.
That's what he asserts. In the alto, the higher realms, consciousness no longer appears with the unitary distinctive characteristics we experience on our plane.
So not like individual minds anymore.
Less so. It becomes a collective fact, forming these nours, these currents, not just of thought, but of attraction, sympathy, love, directly linking spirits in a form of collective existence. He sees the beginnings of this, as we said, even on our plane, in collective consciousness and shared understanding.
It's fascinating, the idea of consciousness as interconnected currents. Now, he also acknowledges that even with all this insight, there's still a lot of mystery lingering beyond our grasp.
Oh, absolutely. He's clear about that. He says, while we've made progress understanding both biological and these superior psychic phases of evolution, a significant amount of mystery remains beyond our current comprehension.
But that doesn't stop the seeking.
Quite the opposite. He points out that the very same fundamental law that limits our vision at these higher levels is also what inherently draws us towards them. It fuels our pursuit of that ultimate mystery. Consciousness, he says, dilates in all its qualities, allowing divine light to descend in ever-increasing spiritual transparency.
And this entire grand process, this evolution, is fundamentally driven by this vibratory harmonization, manifesting as musical resonances.
Precisely. He keeps coming back to that. Evolution is at its core a process of vibratory harmonization. It manifests as these profound musical resonances as we ascend. Each plane reveals unimaginable realities as beings respond with increasing clarity, increasing force to the divine note descending like light. Everything, he says, is essentially a projection, like shadows of varying density cast by God's thought. And all the diverse paths of spiritual ascension, including this mystical phenomenon, ultimately converge towards the center, guiding us towards God as the final destination, the ultimate term of all these resonances.
He also offers a very specific definition of love in this context, doesn't he? It's not just the everyday emotion we usually think of.
Yes, that's crucial. He carefully clarifies he's talking about spiritual love, the kind that inherently unifies, not the more limited, carnal, or egoistic love, which always leaves some residue of separation.
How does he define it?
He defines it as an open-circuit vibration, expansive, altruistic, a mystical expansion characterized by shorter, faster, more dynamic waves, far more penetrating. They can rise beyond Earth's atmosphere, traverse these higher planes, drawing ever closer to the source, achieving a more perfect attunement.
So this love is like a force.
Very much so. He emphasizes that this spiritual love is the main road to God. It's capable of transforming earthly enmity into a sense of heavenly sisterhood. And ascesis, this spiritual discipline, is the process by which this miracle occurs. It reveals the secret of harmonization, where love actively reabsorbs evil, darkness, struggle, pain, reabsorbs them into equilibrium, order, and ultimate happiness.
That's a very active and transformative kind of love. Now, he mentions a shift in his own writing style as he progresses. towards more excelsior, elevated expressions. What prompted that?
He explains that having laid the scientific groundwork, the typically slower pace of rational discourse naturally accelerates. It refines itself in these more elevated forms. He feels his spirit is now eager to take flight, to reveal itself as it truly is, no longer constrained by purely rational representation.
Shedding the limitations?
Exactly, shedding those conceptual coverings to directly approach vision, moving towards that state until he's completely immersed, lost in the ecstasy, burning with divine love.
He also talks about feeling a responsibility to share the fruits of his past suffering, entering a new phase of realizations. It sounds like a real calling.
Absolutely. Having unflinchingly recounted his past struggles in earlier works, he now feels this deep inner compulsion to share the profound fruits of that journey, the conquests, entering this transformative phase of deeper realizations.
Building on his previous work.
Yes, solidifying his earlier grave affirmations with even more profound ones in this New Testament of his experiences, offered with his naked soul before God, as he puts it. He explicitly states he'll now speak of Christ as the central point from which his entire work and personality originate, and into which they ultimately merge, experiencing Christ's ever-increasing presence as a resplendent light.
And he's clearly aware that this message, given the state of the world he saw, might be difficult for people to grasp or accept.
Yes, he vividly describes the amazing spectacle of the world's dilacerating race for the useless. His fundamental aim is to elevate the reader, the listener, to these more rarefied atmospheres of higher intelligence and profound love.
To experience the ecstasy.
To fully experience the sensation of mystical ecstasy as the very substance of the phenomenon. He openly acknowledges the challenge of reaching souls at vastly different stages of inner maturation, but feels this profound duty to help those struggling in darkness, offering the light that was given to him.
He also points to figures like St. Francis of Assisi and St. John of the Cross as key examples of this mystical ascesis. What significance did he draw from them?
He saw them as truly exemplary, St. John of the Cross in particular as a master doctor of mystical theology. His works like Ascent of Mount Carmel, Dark Night of the Soul.
Classics of mystical literature.
Absolutely. They meticulously describe the entire arduous path of ascesis leading to unification with God. He highlights the common thread among all mystics, this intense pressing need, this vertiginous desire for unification, a burning inner love, living with open arms, suffering before reaching, and then singing and loving, inflamed in ecstasy.
And how do these mystics, in their intense pursuit, approach reason? Do they reject it?
No, that's important. He clarifies they don't seek to kill reason, but to surpass and transmute it. They recognize earthly reasoning, developed for the material world, is ultimately inadequate for evaluating spiritual altitudes.
So reason has its limits.
Definitely. While rational arguments might offer an intellectual approximation of God, the essence of God, Ubaldi argues, simply cannot be captured by images or logic. Trying to do so actually hinders direct sensation, closes the pathways of faith.
So how is God known then?
He sees knowledge of God as less laborious research, more profound surrender. The soul rising above reason into a naked vision, beyond image, no longer confining the divine in representation. Consciousness reemerges in clear, vast, immediate luminosity, impenetrable to denser lower vibrations like senses, reason, observation, distinction, logic, leading to pure, simple, unitary vision.
He also delves into the night of the senses, often described in mysticism. What does that involve in Ubaldi's view?
Mystics consistently emphasize overcoming reliance on the sensory world through purification, and Ubaldi describes the initial stages as quite arduous. Very. It involves negating not just reason, but also the senses, deliberately turning inward, repelling the soul from the external world's allure, compressing passions to sublimate them later. This is often where the mystic's anguish begins, feeling torn apart.
The dark night.
Exactly. This night of the senses is seen as a necessary transformative stage for greater spiritual expansion. The whole development involves shifting the center of gravity of consciousness. It has two moments: atrophy of the lower I, the ego, and its reconstitution on a higher plane.
A kind of death and rebirth.
Precisely. This first phase, a form of death, is essential for a more potent expansion in the superhuman zone.
It's interesting he even brings in a scientist like Alexis Carrel here, even if Carrel didn't fully grasp the mystical depth.
Yes, Ubaldi includes Carrel's acknowledgement of the moral factor in knowledge and the potential for surpassing the rational analytical plane into higher conceptual dimensions, even if science alone isn't sufficient for fully understanding mystical phenomena.
It's a step.
It's a valuable initial step, Ubaldi sees it, towards greater scientific acceptance. Ubaldi himself feels this profound urgency to move beyond just hypotheses and analysis, to go deep into the heart of these phenomena and offer exhaustive explanations.
He also touches on divine grace. How does he understand that?
He views grace as a universal, continuous expansion of love towards all beings. It manifests humanly as a rain of gifts, a form of sacrifice and unconditional love for all. Grace expresses its universal character through individuals who act as channels for this divine expansion.
And he draws a clear distinction between the intellectual side of this and the deeply personal, almost incommunicable experience, right?
Absolutely. While the rational aspects can be discussed, maybe partially understood logically, the sensitive aspects, the actual feeling of losing distinct individual consciousness, identifying by reabsorption into the universe's principle, the transhumanization of pain through harmonization.
Those are harder to convey.
He says they're absolutely unimaginable, essentially impossible to fully convey to someone who hasn't personally felt them. Language lacks the words, the human heart lacks the capacity to vibrate and respond fully. This is the realm reached by those who break their involucro, their enclosure, leading to this continuous internal profound contact that is unity.
He distinguishes this ultimate love from limited human love, emphasizing its completeness, its freedom from ego.
Yes, human love tends towards connection, but often remains bound by physical limits, egoistic residues. This ultimate love transcends forms, achieves complete identification without dividing distance or ego.
Like St. Paul.
Exactly. He powerfully echoes St. Paul.
Yeah.
Love is the master road, the most necessary grace. And Paul's cry, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me.
No.
He also draws on Rusbrook.
Who said?
That reason and intelligence stop at the door, but love, driven by divine order, courageously enters, even if blind, possessing an instinct for joy that triumphs over death.
And what did he say is the ultimate reward and the ultimate punishment on this spiritual path?
The greatest punishment. Privation from contemplating God, being outside life's great currents, the greatest joy, direct, intimate contact with God, the supreme inebriation of harmonization, complete fusion.
And this contact is subtle.
Very subtle. This contact of love, making God's presence sensible, palpable, is attainable only through purification, sharpening sensitivity. It's like a high-frequency vibratory note, imperceptible to the common ear, requiring gradual attunement, elevating inner tension. He also highlights contemplation, listening to creation's harmonies, as important musical pathways to elevation, making us conscious witnesses to God's thought.
He paints a beautiful picture of the mystic as the complete poet, fully realizing their dreams. How does he connect mysticism with art in everyday life?
Beautifully. He portrays the mystic as the complete poet who's attained the full reality of their deepest dream. Ecstasy for him is a supreme synthesis of all art, encompassing all conception, all beauty.
So mystics aren't detached from life.
Quite the opposite. They're intensely present, returning to ordinary things with divine vision, renewed love, because they see God within them. Everything serves to elevate their spirit to God. Their egoism transforms into a love embracing all creation.
Leading to a rhythm.
Yes, a dynamic two-part rhythm. Contemplation and action. Intertwined, mutually nourishing, they delve into the divine abyss for light and energy, then descend to serve humanity, alleviate suffering. He again echoes Rusbrook.
What did Rusbrook advise?
That active love and service to the poor holds a higher spiritual order than even interior consolation, even ecstasy. Advising to momentarily leave ecstasy to provide practical help as God repays what's abandoned for charity with greater perfections.
He then shifts to discussing the subconscious and superconscious, using that memorable analogy of a woodworm. Can you unpack that?
Right. He sees the psyche as this continuously growing organism, expanding in depth as life experiences stratify, gravitating inwards. This assimilation, initially conscious, eventually fixes into the deterministic realm of stabilized equilibriums, shaping destiny.
And the subconscious.
The subconscious is this vast zone of formed instincts, innate ideas, automatisms created by repeated life experiences. The law of minimum effort limits conscious effort to new learning. The rest, the synthesized past, settles into the subconscious strata, where automatic qualities emerge, their origins often unconscious.
So consciousness is the active part.
Exactly. The surface consciousness is like an active tentacle, conscious because it's doing new work. The subconscious is the vast reservoir of stored reserves, stable products fixed after conscious formation.
And the woodworm illustrates this.
Yes, vividly. The woodworm consciousness progresses through wood life. It appropriates products of effort, assimilating trials, creating instincts for nourishment, while conquering new space, superconscious, and leaving behind old material subconscious with excrement surpassed instincts. It visualizes the dynamic evolution.
Okay, and how does he differentiate the superconscious from the subconscious? They're both non-conscious relative to the surface mind.
Yes, but they extend in different directions. The superconscious extends inwards, into deeper inner zones, towards God, towards unification, through introspection. The subconscious extends outwards, not underneath, but outside our surface awareness, the accumulated products of external world experiences left behind.
So the I moves between them.
Yes, the conscious I advances between these two non-lucid zones, but its primary direction, its evolution, is always inwards, away from the rudimentary subconscious, towards the higher potential of the superconscious.
Subconscious as residue, superconscious as future potential.
Precisely. Subconscious is residue, lower zone being abandoned. Superconscious is conquest, higher zone containing life's future. The passage is an inward expansion in depth, elevating the being towards higher planes. The I is a nucleus enriched by life, revealing the intimate mystery where God resides, continuously externalized in the lucid conscious plane, a plane of work, transition between subconscious and superconscious relative to individual history and evolutionary maturity.
He then makes a noticeable shift, doesn't he, towards a more personal, experiential description. What does that signal about his audience?
Yes, he explicitly states that while limiting the scope in observed cases, the phenomenon gains significantly in depth of sensation, vividness, solidity of personal experience. He makes it clear the second part is primarily for those who've reached a certain spiritual maturity, who can feel and therefore understand.
Then not for everyone.
He suggests others might find themselves unable to fully enter this world he describes. He acknowledges the personal I style might seem inelegant, but insists it's necessary for conveying the depth, even though he dislikes it. He asks forgiveness, stating these personal I's are for others seeking understanding.
And this personal account involves reliving both the torment and the triumph of the journey.
Exactly. He states he'll essentially relive both the profound torment and the hard-won conquest, showing the unfolding inner storm in powerful images, demonstrating his affirmations aren't arbitrary.
Showing the struggle.
Yes. Portraying himself in moments of defeat and dejection, as well as those transcendent moments when the soul hears the divine music, sings God's glory. He consciously starts from human weakness, misery, to be relatable, showing the painful negation before the divine affirmation, the shadow of the cross before the light of resurrection.
He emphasizes that true understanding comes from integrating both scientific technical insights and personal descriptive accounts.
Yes, firmly. Comprehensive consciousness of the phenomenon's outlines and orientation comes from integrating both rigorous analysis and deeply personal lived experience. This balanced foundation allows his poetry, his expressive narrative, to advance confidently.
He was prudent initially.
He highlights his deliberate prudence in exploring supernormal psychology initially, aiming to show that someone appearing almost mad can still reason coldly, mastering both normal and supernormal psychology. He acknowledges the difficulty, risk, responsibility of such new affirmations before science and faith.
And these affirmations were made lucidly.
He firmly asserts the energetic affirmations he made, and will continue to make, were and will be presented in full reason, complete lucidity, with unwavering awareness of responsibilities and consequences, his soul open for scrutiny.
And his ultimate aim isn't personal, but the affirmation of a universal principle.
Precisely. Not just affirming his experiences, but articulating a fundamental principle with potentially grave repercussions for all human thought, religions, philosophy, ethics, science. He feels his ideas sometimes transcend conventional frameworks, revealing their inherent universality.
Feeling alone in that.
At such moments, yes, feeling profoundly alone, beyond typical classifications like supermedionico, having lived his unique phenomenon in isolation, assuming all risks. But he insists prudence shouldn't lead to silence at decisive moments, requiring full revelation despite personal risks in this divine terrain.
He mentions rigorous self-examination.
Yes, numerous and severe self-examinations before venturing into sensitive fields or daring certain conclusions. Contrasting this with his earlier, more objective analysis of his own case as primarily mediumistic, removing it from fantastical interpretations. He deliberately imposed a psychology of distrust, rational, scientific, despite being intuitive, due to disillusionment with human reason.
His work comes from the depths.
From the depths of the knowable and unconscious, born in strange lucidity from contact with abyssal zones of mystery, requiring his normal rational consciousness to exert severe control over these astonishing immersions.
He also offers a word of caution about exploring the unconscious without a developed superconscious.
Yes. While his experience involves being conscious in the superconscious, he also perceives lower subconscious zones emerging that need conscious recognition and domination. He strongly advises against abandoning the conscious mind prematurely to the unconscious without a largely developed, clearly assured superconscious.
Otherwise.
Otherwise, what seems like inspiration might just be the emergence of soul's lower, less evolved regions.
He then returns to describing his intense personal experience, hearing voices, seeing lights.
Yes, vividly. His conscious eye actively hearing distinct voices from different unconscious planes. And from those normally dark zones, sudden astonishing flashes of light exploding, filling him with awe, revealing immense personality in everything.
Retracing his evolution.
Consciously retracing intricate phases of his own evolution within himself, projecting awareness into superconsciousness zones, hearing different voices, distinct timbre, purity, force depending on their level and his own life position relative to them.
And he also perceives echoes of past psychic forms deep within, even primordial ones.
He mentions consciously approaching faint, distant echoes of living psychic forms buried deep within the eye. Also, the amorphous primordial past rising from the sleep of centuries back into awareness from the subconscious, from shadow depths of race, blood, fundamental instinct stratifications, through the incessant recomposition of flesh and spirit that is life.
The past lingers.
He marvels at how it lingers. The brutal, violent man-beast, the baseness condemned in others' ancient consciousness types refusing to die. He draws a stark contrast. Subconscious contains the animality of the man-beast. Superconscious holds the potential superhumanity of genius and saint.
He sees this whole dynamic journey, subconscious to superconscious, as fundamental to spiritual ascension.
Absolutely. He powerfully emphasizes this evolution as spiritual ascension, the journey from beast to saint, immense universal phenomenon. He describes his own profound neuric perception, especially within himself, his psychic sensitivity allowing contact with a vast range of consciousness planes, high and low.
Seeing both peaks and depths.
Yes, the luminous peaks of the superconscious and the tenebrous depths of the subconscious.
And within those subconscious depths, not just personal history, but the roots of evil, pain, the mystery of being.
He vividly highlights the frightfully deep past in the subconscious, the roots of evil, pain, accompanying daily life needing to be overcome. A whole hidden world, a mystery of being, destiny, the universe. From this deep ocean of pain and victory, guilt and virtue, unexpected shadowy creations emerge, helping or hindering according to our actions.
Infernal possibilities.
He even hints at later descriptions of the infernal and demonic past, capable of emerging from these depths, always within us as a state of consciousness, hell, in the involuted subconscious stages with its demons, individualizations of forced thought will, or paradise in the evolved superconscious stages.
He then contrasts exploring the subconscious with confronting the superconscious, focusing on positive emergence but acknowledging the negative.
Yes. While primarily focusing on positive evolutionary emergences from the superconscious, he conscientiously acknowledges the negative, shadowy, involutive emergence as necessary contrast to subhuman, human, divine aspects. He feels this balanced portrayal reflects truth better, makes his experiences more relatable by humanizing his journey, connecting with struggling individuals, yet to feel spiritual compensations.
He described his emergence into the superconscious as a great happiness, a daily experience of this, well, superconceptual confinement.
Yes, a great happiness,
Yeah.
especially because it was so hard-earned. This superconceptual confinement became his daily reality. His normal consciousness undergoes unforeseen dramatic dilations from continuous pressure on the unknown, sudden lacerations in the surrounding involucro, allowing flashes of blinding light.
Concepts arising from unknown depths.
Constantly. Sudden, profound conceptions in his rational consciousness from unknown depths. Feeling the growing presence of a vaster, intuitive, mystical consciousness where the rational fades. This new consciousness has different units of measure, reference points, seems endless, with inexhaustible conceptual reserves continually flowing with previously unknown ideas.
And this superconscious realm is the source of his writing. Ideas emerge spontaneously.
He explicitly describes his writing as actively tapping this source. Ideas spontaneously emerge as he writes. He feels their sensible presence in his consciousness, becoming his own, precise, indelible. He lets them unfold like living, volitive, autonomous forces until they reveal their entirety.
This work feels beyond his conscious control.
Yes, this agitated work beyond conscious control, active even in mystery's depths, reaching out, drawing in what it finds, brings a sensation of oceanic depths within, freedom to access the inexhaustible, awareness of a vast conceptual reserve, a joy, a sense of power, feeling he's reached life's roots, the principle of things, the absolute's essence.
So writing becomes meditation, prayer, drawing him closer to God.
Exactly. The purest, most beautiful thoughts emerge from these deep regions, paling as they surface into consciousness, crystallized in flickering, dying lights, imprisoned in words, coffins they do not wish to descend into.
But they reappear.
Yes, more alive, splendid, shining in the nebulous sky of his superconscious. Inexhaustible palpitations of immense wisdom from God, potentially appearing in everyone's consciousness with maturation. He contrasts his earlier intuitive phase, conceptual emergence, the great synthesis, with the current mystical phase. Emergence also of feelings, dilation in thought, and sensation intensity, passion.
An emergence of forces.
A powerful emergence of forces gripping, engulfing him in unification. Complicated by an attracting force where the source projects against him to submerge him. This extravio of the being in the infinite is such a dilation of life, his spirit tirelessly returns, flying around it like a moth to blinding light until consumed.
He uses that powerful image of his eye as a ladder extending to infinity, each plane offering a stronger, more luminous synthesis.
Yes, vividly. His eye as a ladder stretching endlessly. Each consciousness plane ascended offers a more powerful, luminous synthesis of the cosmos. His being is inebriated by this continuous advance, exploration, revealing breathtaking new horizons.
And the eye changes as it ascends.
As the eye moves through superconscious states, it dematerializes, rarefies, feels itself diluting, evaporating. Yet this evaporation, where the old concrete eye isn't recognized, carries him far. It's decomposition where God replaces his small eye, absorbing everything into himself.
Leading to those classic mystical phrases.
Yes, the emergence of Blessed Angela Foligno's Thou art I and I am thou. And St. Paul's It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me, suggesting this can occur in everyone's heart.
So, wrapping up this deep dive into Pietro Ubaldi's mystical ascesis, we've really journeyed through his intricate understanding of the spiritual path, haven't we? From those first sparks of inspiration right up to profound unification, we looked at his critique of purely objective thought.
Right, and the crucial role he saw for intuition, and especially love, as the pathways to deeper knowing, plus his exploration of the superconscious and the real challenges posed by the subconscious.
And we definitely witnessed his intensely personal accounts of ecstasy, his profound connection with Christ, seeing Christ not just historically, but as this inner living presence, the embodiment of divine love.
And those powerful insights into love's transformative power. Its ability to actually overcome pain and harmonize all the dissonances we experience. Really profound stuff.
So, for you, our listener, who's seeking that quick but thorough knowledge, appreciating those aha moments without feeling overwhelmed, consider Ubaldi's assertion that every soul is made to see and hear. It's a challenging thought.
It really is. What might be preventing us from perceiving that tourbillon of spheres, that divine canticle he describes so vividly? How could we maybe cultivate that vibratory state of attunement he talks about to access deeper knowledge and experience?
This deep dive definitely encourages reflection, doesn't it, on the limits of just using rational or objective approaches for these kinds of profound realities.
Yeah, and it really prompts us to consider the potential of inner exploration, intuition, and maybe above all, love, as these vital pathways towards uncovering deeper truths about ourselves, about the universe.
So if these concepts have resonated with you, sparked something, we definitely encourage you to explore mystical ascesis further. This deep dive, as always, has really only scratched the surface of Ubaldi's deep and sometimes challenging ideas.
It's just the beginning, really, of a potentially fascinating journey into the nature of consciousness and spirituality itself.